Like, basically, I want to talk about Path of Exile 2 that came out.
Yeah.
Okay, so Path of Exile 2 came out. Yet another game that is not Diablo 2. Saying, hey, man, do you remember Diablo 2? And I say, yes, I do remember Diablo 2. I like Diablo 2 quite a lot. How is Path of Exile 2? Path of Exile 2 has maybe my favorite community reaction of anything I've ever seen in my entire life, where they're going to keep going with Path of Exile 1.
Oh, yeah.
And Path of Exile 2 is also going to keep going forward. Like, these games are not, like, it is not replacing the first game.
That is unsustainable. That doesn't, like, how? Skeleton Crew?
Well, I'll tell you how. They're very different. They're very different. And they have confirmed that all of your cosmetics and all of your account upgrades from Path of Exile 1 are going to apply to Path of Exile 2. It's like not all the cosmetics have been ported into Path of Exile 2.
Okay.
But like all of it, which is nuts.
That's a really cool commitment for anybody who plans to stick around the first game. That's awesome. Monetarily, so you usually go like, now we're moving shit.
Yeah, no, it's ridiculous. The fan reaction to it is super nuts because it depends on what subreddit you go to. The Path of Exile 1 subreddit is like, oh, this new game is shit. I'm going to stick with Path of Exile 1. And the Path of Exile 2 subreddit is like, this is so amazing. I bounced off Path of Exile 1 like 100 times, and I was never able to get into it, but Path of Exile 2 is the fucking shit. Oh, and it's like, it's because they're different. They look like, from a visual, like if I showed you two screenshots, like they look like bordering identical. They are dramatically fucking different games.
You're describing the Darkest Dungeon community, by the way.
Yeah, I totally am. And the basic gist of it is that Path of Exile 1 is a very, very classic click mouse to move Diablo game.
Yeah.
And the way that it works is Diablo, but more. Right?
Original devs that left, correct?
I believe so.
Yeah, okay.
And Path of Exile 2 is... And I saw someone say this, and I think they might actually be dead on for once. It is the Dark Souls of Path of Exile, because... so controller support is out the gate.
Saying it. Okay.
Unironically.
Okay.
The controller support is out the gate, unlike Path of Exile 1, where it was added years later. And your primary attack is R1, and your secondary attack is R2, and blocking with your shield is L1, and your tertiary attack is L2, and then you have your face buttons for things, but except for circle, which is your dodge roll. Because instead of having Diablo-style enemies, it has action game / soul-style enemies that have telegraphed attacks and combos and shit.
You're not cursoring.
No. And even on keyboard, it's WASD to move. It's not mouse clicking. And that dramatically changes how the game works. Because now it is not like they can expect you to dodge shit.
Is there a counter argument for why games are not just automatically better with that? Is it because, like, if there's other goals in mind, like RTSing, for example, or so, you're like, okay, we can't be bothered. You can't be getting into like action gaming every unit. Obviously, you need to be more zoomed out. But
it's just a design decision coming from like Dune 2.
But when you're controlling
like
one,
1990 something,
when you're controlling one character. Is it not easier? Is it not just better objectively?
It's just the way things used to work, and that's how games got made, and then games got made that way, and that's that.
Okay.
Like, I'm not saying it's worse or better. I'm just saying, like, that's just the nature of that control scheme, and then that control scheme expanded around it.
That sounds fucking phenomenal.
So you'd be like WERT and Q and shit. Those would be your that'd be your buttons, right? So you have your hand on active abilities at all times.
I can feel the powering up stupid take fucking energy inside of me.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But I'm like, there are games, and this is just a matter of preferences, right? But there are games where even if all assets and everything setting wise and everything going on is the same, there are games where they land, and this one lands more like a card game with a couple extra steps, and this one lands more like a video game that you control moment to moment. And I always lean towards that second one. It's just way more fun for me.
So this one's slightly out of your wheelhouse, but less so because you played a bunch of Baldur's Gate 3. So this was a huge back and forth for like decades over how computer RPGs should play. Okay. Because classically they played real time with pause, which is the characters will all auto attack unless you paused it with space and then told them where to cast and who to attack and all that. And it would be based off a 6-second round a la D&D, right? Mm-hmm. And Pillars and 1 and 2 were real time with pause because Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 were real time with pause. And then when Divinity Original Sin 2 and Baldur's Gate 3 came out, hey, turns out turn-based is like the most accessible, easy to understand system for an RPG ever for everyone. Mm-hmm. Overwhelmingly so. Oh yeah, people point out KOTOR was real time with pause. Right? Everyone would do their shit unless you stop them.
True. Yeah, okay.
And it's like originally real time with pause was supposed to emulate D&D because the characters are all acting along 6-second rounds, and you could just say that if a spell cast two rounds to cast, it would just shoot it would take 12 seconds, what have you. And just the overwhelming popular consensus was turn-based, please. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's the case with like click to move / WASD games. Like, you please let me control my character with directional inputs.
Yeah, I mean, Baldur's Gate, like when the fights get extremely complicated, seeing that really long list of like who's acting when and sanely planning out your moves and stuff, it helps a lot in that circumstance, as opposed to just, I don't fucking know, it's all going, do something, right?
One of the things that
interrupt the timeline that is just playing.
One of the things that Josh Sawyer talked about during his Pillars of Eternity 2 postmortem is that real time with pause didn't work as well in the new games as they did in the old ones. And the reason for that is really simple. It's because the old games, you actually had really limited control of your characters. If you were a melee fighter in Baldur's Gate 1, your options were move and hit. And that was it.
Okay.
That was your whole kit. The only characters you actually had to really control were like wizards and maybe a cleric.
Side note, the only thing worse than deciding is the worst of both worlds, where during your turn you have a limited amount of time. ATBing it is just abysmal. Anyway,
I think the best of both worlds is the way that Pathfinder Kingmaker does it and Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, where it's both. It's the only game series I can think of that actually has turn-based and real-time with pause. So basically, you roll real-time with pause over trash, and then when you run up against something that's going to be super fucking for real,
it
you
switches
switch to turn-based.
Okay, yeah. I mean, to some light degree, Metaphor is doing that too, right? Like,
that's different.
It is. But like, I was surprised that some enemies that were like trash enemies would like still take hits and come back at you, and like make it like you've got to roll past that swing and fight this little thing on the overworld for more than just one hit, Anyway, okay. Would you say that?
Well, yeah. So Path of Exile 2 is like a Diablo, the Dark Souls game. It's fucking cool. It feels really good to play. It is so much more appealing to me than Path of Exile 1 was. And number one on that list of things that makes it cool is you can pause the game. Killer feature.
Previously, you were stuck in real time
because it was an online game. And people could jump in and out. So you can pause.
Yes. Okay.
But now, right. Path of Exile 2, you can pause the game, which means it's baby-proof.
God, I remember when Souls was first being explained to me, and I remember like the idea of like, well, it's online, so you don't pause it, but also it's because it's extra hard. There's no breaks, you know.
Yeah, and then it's actually like, well, you can actually pause super fast in a Souls game if you get really good at exiting the game to main menu in like 1 second.
Or you could always just pull out the camera mode in the PS5 version of Demons.
Yeah, that's a goofy one. That's a goofy.
Like, oops, bro.
Ruh-roh.
Interesting. Okay. Would you say, I'm curious, would you say most people agree with the change?
I do. I would say Path of Exile 2's new controls are definitely more palatable to a much wider variety of people overall. But in the Path of Exile community, that is a bunch of mouse click freakazoids who love that shit and live and breathe it, it's divided.
Okay.
That's how it seems to be.
You're fighting tradition.
Yeah, but yeah, that's a good way to phrase that.
Okay.